Happy politics, and welcome to the post-election version of BC Poly Hot Stove. My name is Maclean K. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Orca, and in an effort to make Jordan crack up, I'm going to lean aside and let you see the Halloween costume my wife is making for my son. That is the Death Star. I thought you would enjoy that. You might even find it apropos. Jordan Bateman joining me in a socially distant manner from, I believe, in Burnaby. We established that last week. That is not your living room.
Yes, Jordan Bateman, VP Communications for the Independent Contractors Business Association. And yes, the Empire struck back on the weekend, but the return of the Jedi is a mere 4 years away, I'm sure. So off we go into the world. I would like to point out, though, the Green Bay Packers won this weekend, which,
they did.
You know, the Seattle Seahawks lost this weekend. So I went 2 for 3. All right, so not bad. Not bad.
That's, your weekend, all things considered. Right. How was, other than that, how was the play, Mrs. Lincoln?
Yes.
And, well,
yes.
I mean,
welcome to our most watched Hot Stove ever, as Maclean and Jordan go through the 5 stages of grief. Well, not Maclean. He's much too independent for that. But as Jordan goes through the 5 stages of grief, led by his therapist, Dr. K.
Well, where do you want to start? There's
denial.
A lot
you always start with
here.
Denial. So then we move to bargaining, anger.
Yes.
I forget the 4th one, and then sad acceptance. So
yes, that's true. I think just grief is one of them, but that's fine.
I'm a little grief. Anger. Anger is probably the closest to where I am at right now. But
well, okay. Well, let's at the risk of making you angrier.
I'm gonna Hulk Horgan up. Here we go.
Pretty decisive. Pretty convincing. The standings now are, I believe, 55, 29, and 3, respectively. Now, there is every chance that a handful of those seats are going to switch because there's a huge number of advance voting ballots yet to be counted. That is not going to change the overall results of this election. If you're wondering if that's where we're going, it's not. But there are a couple seats where it very well may. But for the time being,
Vernon, for example, Eric Foster leads by less than 1 point. Abbotsford, Mission, Simon Gibson leads by less than 1. Chilliwack Kent, the NDP lead by 1.2. So there's lots that could switch.
Yeah, I mentioned one in this morning's fan. I mean, even Parksville Qualicum, which has the NDP up by almost exactly 1,000 votes, seems completely unreversible. But there are 14,000 advance ballots in that riding alone.
Wow.
Now, I'm not suggesting it will switch. I'm just saying we've never had an election like this one. Anyway, the big picture is not going to change. It's going to be 4 years, we think, of an NDP majority government.
Yeah, who knows with this guy? He may call an election next week if he thinks he can get another 4 years. All right, well, let's talk about it. So going into the weekend, I had predicted 60 NDP seats, 25 BC Liberal, and 2 Green. So I'd actually over-predicted the NDP. So I guess by that token, all right, there you go. There are a lot of flaws in this election campaign. There have been a lot of flaws in kind of BC Liberal handling of things since probably 6 months before the 2017 election. And it's kind of like a little bit of a comedy of errors that have gone on. And, what follows comedy is tragedy. And here you are with the remnant, basically, the BC Liberals very much in danger of not just, because this is an important part of the province, but just becoming a rural party. That said, I think this is, I always remember Election Day 2001 and sitting at Rich Coleman's victory party next to a then township councillor, recently retired township councillor, Dean Drysdale. And he leaned over to me. He passed away a year or so ago. But he leaned over to me and he's like, 77-2. It's all downhill from here. And, he was right. It's still going downhill. That said, this kind of wave election, this, I think, is the high point of NDP. It would be hard for the NDP to pick up more seats. Even if some of these flip and they end up with 60, I think that's like the top end that you're ever going to get in this province for the lefties. So, okay, well, now we know. Now you know where bottom is, and now you got to start rebuilding and doing the very hard work of riding by riding, going through and rebuilding some sort of free enterprise coalition.
No, I mean, yes, you're right. It's I mean, you look at where the Liberals lost seats. It's, they were swept in Tri-Cities. They lost a lot of ground in Surrey. For now, they're shut out of, and probably will be shut out of, Vancouver Island entirely. It's You're right. How many? I think the BC Liberals have 2 seats in Vancouver. Although the False Creek seat
Lee and Wilkinson, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, Lee and Wilkinson, and I believe Langara, Michael Lee's seat, is still pretty close.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right.
6 points. He leads by 6 points.
Okay. Well, that's more secure. But again, there's just an ungodly number of absentee ballots to be counted yet. So yeah, you're right. It's hopefully this election is a wake up call for those in the party. Yeah. There was a lot of this talk after 2017 and in the 2018 election, where there was kind of 2 schools of thought within the BC Liberal Party. One was that really things don't have to change much. It was kind of a fluke that they lost in 2017. So goes that school of thought. And, they just need like one break or wait for the NDP to slip up and they'll be back in government. Bob's your uncle. Yeah. The other school of thought looked at, well, you kind of mentioned it, 2001, that was the high water mark. The vote share kept going down. And it was actually worse than that because it was going down in the demographics and communities that were growing the fastest. And so eventually the party was going to have to start speaking to those communities more than it had been. Not even necessarily changing a lot of the policies, but making sure that some of that stuff was more front and center. The former group won with Andrew Wilkinson, who was kind of a continuity candidate. And, well, here we are today.
Yeah, well, we've now said the name Andrew Wilkinson, so I have many thoughts. This is a guy who went into this campaign having been the leader of the BC Liberal Party for 2.5 years, almost 3 years.
Yeah.
And was still completely unknown to most British Columbians. This is a guy who, as we finally found out during the campaign, was apparently a doctor. But
that was the rumor.
Who never seized upon what are, on paper, pretty impressive credentials. And you and I have talked before about, like, the Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump thing where, being the smartest person in the room isn't necessarily a path to get elected. The BC Liberals never found a way to rebrand smart as being helpful in a political campaign or being, that being smart would be actually a good idea for this. When COVID struck, Wilkinson did the ethical, moral thing, but not the politically savvy thing. He threw in with the NDP and got behind them and said, okay, we're going to do this. One problem is he put Norm Letnick out in front of the BC Liberal effort. No offense to Norm, your leader is a friggin' doctor. He should have been the one out in front of that, probably, in hindsight. Like, he should have been the one standing up and saying, no, we got to rally. He's the one who should have been doing things like, here's how you wear a mask, and, here's a 20-second video on how to wash your hands, and, those little things that, he could have had a little bit of gravitas doing. I was frustrated a few times over the last few years when I would pitch ideas to the party or, and say, like, why don't you, can Andrew go out and volunteer somewhere during COVID? Like, he's a former doctor. Dix was trying to get all hands on deck to help. Is there not a long-term care home he can go and volunteer at? He didn't do any of that. And not for publicity's sake. Like, I figured a social media picture would leak at some point, and that would be as a press, like, oh, okay, here's a guy rolling up his sleeves and try to actually help out. But it just felt like you could never get past that. I'm a little critical of the photos. Whenever we saw pictures of Andrew Wilkinson, he generally wasn't with other people. That's a bad look for a leader whose the book on is that he's too smart for his own good and he doesn't connect with people. He's not a retail politician at all. That shouldn't have mattered that much in a Zoom campaign, but it did. And then he was so slow to act on things. Like, Laurie Throness should have been dealt with 2 years ago. Like, this has been a bubbling cauldron for a long time. The John Martin, Diane Jensen issue. There's going to be a lot of talk that demographics have changed in Langley, Abbotsford, and Chilliwack. But if you actually dig into the numbers and not just the lazy media narratives, no offense, lazy media, but if you actually dig into the numbers, like, no offense, Justin McElroy, but you're all excited about, I've seen the clip, you're all excited, oh, Chilliwack's got NDP, oh, it's a historic demographic, blah. No, it's bullshit. It's vote splits. Diane Jensen and John Martin split the vote there. Guess what? That let the NDP run up the left side and take a lead. The Laurie Throness thing, there wasn't a BC Liberal candidate in the other Chilliwack. Jason Lum, that split that one. Langley East, You had a Conservative candidate running on his dead father's name recognition, which he can really only do once. He took 12 points. That may have put that. Right now the NDP is leading that riding. So you had all this kind of going on. I think the BC Conservatives cost 5 different ridings, but there's no demographic shift in like there's demographics change, but the BC Liberals still they would still be the favorites 4 years from now to get those back. So. There's a lot of talk like, Chilliwack's full of all these refugees from Yaletown, and Yaletown people didn't move to Chilliwack. I'm sorry. Yaletown people maybe moved to New Westminster. New Westminster people maybe moved to Langley, and Langley people maybe moved to Chilliwack. Like, no offense, give me a break. If you lived in Yaletown, you're not now living in your fancy. I mean, there'll be a couple who did, but you're not, living there. So, just settle down. Actually, look at the results before you start making sweeping statements that the demographics have changed in the valley. Some of it was a perfect storm of vote splitting.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it is, before we get the final results, to dig into some of those numbers. Sure. I mean, and if I'm reading you right, you're not saying that the BC Conservative vote split is the reason for the election results writ large, but in certain seats, which I think is an entirely different and fair argument to make.
Yeah, and the numbers back it up. I think I counted 4 or 5 seats where it was costly. And the BC Conservatives had no chance of forming government. They only ran 19 candidates. I'm not sure what their end goal is, except to destroy the BC Liberals. I think they would probably subscribe to what I would call the little finger strategy. Chaos is a ladder. And so by destroying the BC Liberals and having an NDP, and somehow this may bring them to prominence, Littlefinger ended up getting his throat slit by, I believe, little Arya Stark, if I recall correctly. She was there for sure.
Well, he definitely met with a bad end.
Yes, exactly. He survived the moon door, but he didn't survive the series, and he did not end up as the king. So chaos is not always a ladder.
No, he did get a lot of the best lines, but that's not what they're going for in BC politics. I mean, they probably look at the BC Liberals taking out the Socreds as kind of their model, but I mean, things have changed. I don't see that working. Obviously, they feel differently, but what was the total across the province? The total vote share for the BC Conservatives, something like 2.3, but it's extremely, efficient, I guess the word is, in terms of where it had an impact.
And where this is problematic is that some of the narrative is, Andrew Wilkinson, he empowered these anti-LGBTQ candidates, and he wasn't strong enough, the places where the Conservatives ran and cost BC Liberals, like the BC Liberals cost 4 or 5 seats by the Conservatives. So for not being conservative enough. And you and I have talked before, like Mark Dalton in the 2017 election lost because he wasn't conservative enough. Like, it's bananas. So, these issues. Look, Andrew Wilkinson should have dealt with the Jane Thornthwaite thing faster. Should have dealt with Laurie Thronis years ago. Should have actually been a lot more active in renewing the party. Should have been out there making more phone calls, more visits to communities, I just keep thinking of that Gordon Campbell story of, like, who's the one person who can win this riding? Oh, it's Bill Berezov. Everyone would tell him Bill Berezov, Bill Berezov, Bill Berezov. So Campbell didn't rest until he got Bill Berezov's name on a ballot. And guess what? That's now had become a reliable BC Liberal stronghold for 5 elections. So
and that's what opposition leaders do.
Yeah, exactly. So who's the Bill Berezov in Courtney Comox? Maybe it was the youngster that they ran there. Probably, clearly not. Like, they didn't win. Like, who was the Bill Berezov in Stikine? That's the one with Nathan Call. They got to go out and find these folks, and that takes work. And it takes introducing them to the public. It takes cultivating their image. It takes working with the riding association. And I'm just not sure that Andrew did
you're
the
right.
work.
The good news, and this is admittedly not that great of good news, is that after 2017 and the government fell, it was a minority government, and the BC Liberals had convinced themselves that, they could be the switch or the election could come at any time.
Right.
And so there was always a bit of urgency. We don't have time for long-term stuff. Now, it's going to be 4 years. Barring some cataclysm, the NDP are going to milk every last moment of this term, as they should. But now that you have 4 years to do all that work, and it is a lot of work, riding by riding, but there's time to do it now.
Yeah, exactly. The first thing you got to do is you got to do a proper autopsy on this campaign. And you have to have someone from outside the campaign apparatus go in and review everything. Because we need to know, was it the leader was getting bad advice and following it? Was the leader getting great advice and not following it? Was it that the party was under-resourced? Was it that the party got caught after, years and years of sending out emails that an election was just around the corner? Got caught with their pants down when there was actually an election around the corner? Like, these are all perfectly valid questions to be asking. So you have to have that. I think John Baird did it for the sheer conservatives. You got to have that autopsy.
Someone did it for the BC NDP after 2013 too, and I'm forgetting who it was.
Yes, you're right. I recall that.
It's a name that is familiar too. But the point is that they did it.
World.
Yeah. And whether obviously some of the lessons got learned, and there was a group that formed shortly after the election called, I think, Forward BC NDP, which basically said explicitly, look, the party needs to modernize, or we're never going to win an election again. So there was a recognition then on their side that, things need to change. This is not fate. This is not,
And before we move off Andrew, let me say one more thing. Andrew is a technocrat in an age of populism.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you have to be crazy populist, but you have to have policies and the ability to articulate things that connect with real people. The PST cut is a better economic policy than John Horgan's $1,000 bribe. It just is.
I agree with that.
It does more for creating jobs. It gives, we've done more for attracting investment. He never communicated as such. And it became, it's a tax break for electric bikes and yachts. What? What? No. First of all, yacht sellers are people too, number one. But second of all, it actually would have sparked, actual economic benefit for job creators at a time where they are reeling. But he could never articulate that. And, he never turned it on. He just never turned anything back on the NDP, right? What are you going to cut to do this? I don't know. Ask John Horgan what he's going to cut. He's got the same, he's been squirreling away $1.5 billion that he hasn't spent. He could have turned that back on them and just seemed incapable of doing it. Andrew's always a guy.
They had a tendency to present their ideas as self-evidently good. Mm-hmm. Here is what we're going to do, and of course you will see that it will benefit you. Yeah. There wasn't enough. I agree with you. There wasn't enough. Well, it'll do this, this, and this, and we think it'll do this. There was never enough of that. Joe commuter in Surrey. Yeah. This is how we think it'll help you.
Yeah. And then there wasn't enough connecting. Think of the times when the BC Liberals were most effective on opposition days. It was when they had real people coming in and reinforcing their narrative.
Yes.
The Clack construction workers, the spec tax people. I think that was probably they had a few different groups come in.
People,
the farmers.
On more than one occasion.
Exactly. They never had any of those real people validators. They didn't have a small business standing up and say, hey, this would really help us out, a PST cut. Or a local mayor saying, we could stretch our infrastructure dollars 7% farther with this. That's going to make a big deal. That's going to make a big difference. They never ever had those kind of validators. And I think probably because I just don't think their platform was ready. And so they were kind of shooting from the lip there. And they didn't have the time to do the work in order to support it. But again, that's what an autopsy would show. And it's one that, it's something that you've got to have before you can go forward, because you got to know where the problems were and how to fix them. While at the same time, look, there are certain terms that have become part of BC politics that you and I know, and that people who watch this show know, and that the 500 people at the Ledge know, but don't actually mean a lot anymore to normal humans.
Yeah. Outside the bubble.
Outside the bubble. Free enterprise probably does not mean anything to the average, 20-something-year-old. But, or to the average 30-year-old. But, you say, look, lowering taxes creates, more housing, and if we can kind of connect the dots, they start to get the picture, right? That, we need to make sure that we're redefining these terms, finding new terms that connect with younger voters, that connect with female voters. And, it just didn't happen in this campaign. And there were opportunities. Like Andrew Wilkinson at the convention a couple years ago gave a very good speech, and that got genuinely emotional when he talked about his daughters and some of the challenges they faced in the workplace.
That's right. I remember that.
And instead of building on that and coming out the next day and saying, you know what, the number one problem for facing women and going back to work is the fact that childcare costs are so high, And it takes, basically they're working for pennies on the dollar because so much of that money goes into childcare. We are going to come out with an aggressive childcare plan. He waits. And, it comes out in the platform, and it's a good plan. It's means tested, it makes sense, but gets totally buried. And, no one is thinking, oh, the BC Liberals, they actually care about childcare. They've actually learned about something. That was one of those programs that should have been brought out sooner. And who cares if the NDP kick the crap out of it, while they're in government? You just point to their ability, right? They created 16% of the spaces they said they were going to create. That's a fail. We're going to do better. Like, you had lots of runway there, but again, they just got too cute. They kept trying to hide things until the election.
Yeah, and I think they were still thinking in terms of government. I mean, I think the childcare example is a really good one in that you're right. There was a sense of opportunity there because people did take notice of when he got emotional in the speech. And that would have been a good time the next day or even 2 days later to say, look, this is what we want to do and why, because it's really important. And yes, they thought that the NDP would say, well, it won't work because of this, this, and this. Yeah. Because when you're in government, you have to have all those answers. But when you're in opposition, you can think a little differently. You can have big ideas and worry about the details later. And it sounds irresponsible, but you're not in government. That's that's the whole point, is coming up with big ideas and undermining what the government wants to do. But they kept thinking in terms of being in government. They still thought as ministers.
Yeah. Look, Horgan's done it for 2 elections. Horgan had big ideas in this election he threw out there that he has no way, $1,000 before Christmas. Now he's saying, well, I don't know if I can get it to you before Christmas.
Or indeed at all.
$400 rental rebates. Oh, I don't know if I can get that for you. Governing is hard. Oh, I'm going to reduce portables in Surrey by 50%. Oh, they're up a third. Okay.
And saying, well, we can't possibly get the legislature back before Christmas. Really? It's October.
Yeah. And you have a massive majority. You can't do a 3-day session?
Yeah.
Come on.
The final result's still mid-November. Fine. You still have people. We have sat right up until the Christmas break before. I mean, it's not. There are 2 months more than.
He doesn't want to do it. These are the kind of things that, Andrew, I think because he was a deputy minister, because he was a lawyer and a doctor, he would talk himself out of these ideas. And he'd go half measures. Frick, like opening ICBC up to competition. Why? I would have gone out there and said, let's sell ICBC to, these union guys love ICBC so much, we're going to sell to the union. And when they can pay us back over a period of time and the employees can own it and they'll be open to competition and off we go. And
that's a good idea.
Don't do half measures. Don't do he should have come out and said, oh, they're promising, we're doing a PST cut. They promised $1,000. We'll match that $1,000 because clearly John Horgan's been hoarding money away in this budget that we didn't know about because now he suddenly magically has it. So we're going to do that too. Don't do half measures. Go all out. And that was one of the problems is, I think, because he's the smartest guy in the room, quote unquote, he would talk himself out of these things. He hasn't resigned yet. My suspicion is he will announce he's not going to stay on as leader, but then stay on as leader until a new one is selected, maybe?
I suspect. I mean,
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, when Christy Clark resigned, she resigned immediately with immediate effect, creating a need for a by-election. I would suspect that if he did, and I don't want to prejudge, he may decide that he wants to stay. Adrian Dick suffered a devastating defeat in 2013 and stayed on. Yeah. And today is respected as Minister of Health. And if I was advising Andrew Wilkinson, I would say, look, if you're wanting to rehabilitate yourself, that's your model. But if he did resign as leader, he creates a pretty tempting seat opportunity for whoever does win leadership. Yes. It would be kind of like when Gordon Campbell resigned. Yeah. And then obviously Christy Clark, who was not an MLA, there was a seat for her to run in. So there's a number of things that could work there.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And, you're right. There could be another act for Andrew Wilkinson, Minister of Health, Minister of Finance. You could see that.
Yeah,
perfectly.
Absolutely.
And it would be a good use of his talents, and we'd go from there. But you're right. His seat would be quite desirable for an outside
one of the
leader.
Most desirable in the province.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can only ask Ben Stewart. You can only ask Ben Stewart to step aside so many times, right?
I think that. Sorry, Ben. They've gone to that well probably once too many. Yeah, too many times.
Sorry, Ben. That's the case. I don't know about you, but my phone's been blowing up with all sorts of random leadership suggestions.
Oh yes.
Do we want to talk about that a little bit? Like names that are being floated, or?
It feels, you know what? Let's save that for if we talk later in the week or next week, just because we don't know yet. We don't know, and we haven't talked about some of the other aspects of this election yet.
Yes,
I do want to talk about this. The NDP won a big victory and are very happy. I suspect there's one thing they're not happy about though, and that is obviously. Now, Horgan has said yesterday he's horrified at the very suggestion that they would be targeting the Green seats on Vancouver Island. I'm sorry, that's just not true. And obviously the Greens kept both their seats. But I suggest to you, Jordan, that if I am a long-term NDP thinker and I am smart, and there are such people on that side, they're very, very, very concerned about the Greens finally getting a beachhead in the Lower Mainland.
Yes.
Because that, for them, has been the bugbear. And now, granted, it is literally a beachhead. It's the West Vancouver Sea to Sky riding.
Yeah.
And but the Greens becoming a more viable contender in and around Vancouver is a significant problem for them. And I suspect that if you gave NDP strategists a truth serum, they would say that is the single result from this election that is going to keep them up at night.
I would agree. I would note that the Sea to Sky Green candidate's ahead by 3.5 percentage points. So
fair enough.
Still very close. However, that is, even if the NDP end up capturing that and they stay a close second, that is not great long-term for the NDP. It would be hilarious and totally within Horgan's character now to deny a 3-seat Green caucus official party status. Like, that is so John Horgan. Like,
yes,
I needed you and screw you.
If you're watching this, just a quick. Traditionally, 4 seats is the threshold for official party status, which is hugely important because you get more money.
And questions.
Is what it is.
Yeah.
Pardon me?
And I think you get more questions too in QP.
Yes, you get questions in QP and you get money. So when you're just a collection of 3 MLAs, you'll be given funding for a staff or so member each. But if you're an official party, the leader of the party also gets funding, which essentially doubles your staff. And that was a big part of the deal in 2017 is the Greens had 3 MLAs and both the NDP and Liberals would have given them official party status, which gave them a lot more resources, probably double what they had before. Then Horgan said that if the Greens in this campaign returned with just 2, they would not have official party status, and that would be well. So we'll see.
If he's going to screw them over. Like, if they're banking on official party status, they should consider that a bonus. Like, Horgan will screw them over. It's just, it's the scorpion stinging the turtle or whatever the story is, right? Like, it's what the scorpion does, and they are petrified of the Greens. Because, again, as exciting to them as seeing the BC Conservatives cost the BC Liberals some votes, they are very aware that the Greens pull from them. And if you have a 55-seat majority government going into the next election, more of those kind of lefty flank people will be like, well, maybe that's the thing. And if Horgan flip-flops on Site C, and it turns out he's cost us $8.5 billion, it will reinforce for a lot of people, like, maybe,
Yeah.
Site C is the fascinating litmus test for me on what happens next with John Horgan, because he can't walk the line. There's no line to be walked between the working part of the party and the environmental part of the party. If he decides that he's going to continue on with Site C and it turns out it's going to be $20 billion or whatever, he's cost himself that environmental wing of the party, and they're going to go over to many of them will go over to the BC Greens. If he decides, no, I'm going to kill it, and I'm just going to suck up that we lost $8 billion on this project, and it's all the BC Liberals' fault somehow, he's going to lose the workers' side of the party, which is like, hold up, like, that's 5,500 construction workers out of work. 5,500. That's a lot of pink slips. And, they're not on, that's not because of the BC Liberals, it's not because of the Greens, it's because of John Horgan. So, Von Palmer, I think, wrote 3 times during this campaign about the Site C decision that's coming. And John Horgan studiously avoided any knowledge of it. Like, ooh, what do you mean Site C? What's the Site C? I've never even heard of it. It'll be interesting to see how that pans out, because there's going to be a lot of labor versus environmental issues in that party. There always are. But now the Greens, by having two straight elections with 3 seats and a leader who is bright and shiny and new and was well reviewed. This isn't Jagmeet Singh, leading the party. This is actually someone who seems to be pretty good and is now experience, as is Adam Olsen, and free from the shackles of crazy Dr. Weaver, they can move on. So these are like, look, I gotta say flat out, like, congratulations to the NDP. This obviously, 2001 was a debacle for your party. 2013, I remember listening to John Horgan on the Alex Takumas show the next day, and you could, his voice was quivering. He was clearly brokenhearted over the outcome of that. You somehow steal a minority from a party that actually had more seats and more votes, but okay. And now, you've paid it off into probably what, will be the biggest majority in your party's history for a long time. This will be the high water mark for a long time. You got to congratulate them for that. And there's lots of good folks within the NDP who I hope will provide a more reasonable balance. Be reasonable in how you're dealing with groups that aren't in your friends and insiders. Hopefully they will. The Gary Beggs of the world, the Mike Farnworths of the world, they're very reasonable human beings. Hopefully they will not just default to the crazy ideology of the, trade unions and whatnot. But we'll see. You got to give them a chance and hope that they've learned other lessons from the 90s, including that when they give into their ideology and become arrogant with power, they get wiped out pretty quick.
Yeah, well, and that there are a lot of people within the NDP writ large that do think that their role is not to become a natural long-term governing party. Quite seriously, it's more of a here for a good time, not a long time. Whereas, they think their role is to come into power once every 20 years or so and bring forth a lot of really fast, rapid change that then kind of may or may not stand the test. It's kind of the Dave Barrett school of thinking. Now, there are some within the NDP who do still think that way, but I do think that gradually the tide. I don't think John Horgan believes that. I think the tide is changing and that they now see themselves as wanting to become, BC's natural governing party. I'm not suggesting that will be the case, but that's what they aspire to, rather than the radical change every 20 years or so.
Yeah, I disagree. I think Horgan is one of those radical types. I think he's going to feel unfettered now. John isn't known for his introspection or humility, so I think. You're going to see a little bit more of the arrogance, and especially. Oh,
you're going to see some stuff that
It's a great feeling when you're in the House. Listen, it's got to be a great feeling when you're in the House as government and you look over to the opposition benches and you can see your MLAs kind of creeping over onto the other side because you've run out of seats on your side. It is a wonderful feeling, I'm sure. Yes. And it is one that those cabinet ministers will feel over and over and over again, and it causes a whole other set of problems.
Indeed, it does. We talked about the Greens. We've, I guess, briefly talked on the NDP. We've talked about the BC Liberals.
Do you think Nathan Collin makes it into cabinet, or do you think?
Yeah, that's Rob Shaw asked that question on Twitter, and I was surprised that a lot of people said no. I think absolutely he makes it into cabinet. The only reason to stomach
how many old white men does John Horgan need to have in positions of power?
Well, that will be a problem he has. And I'm not disagreeing with you there. All I'm saying is that Horgan clearly thinks a lot of Cullen and was happy to swallow a lot of the issues that Cullen brought along with him this campaign. Cullen did not bathe himself in glory. No. And the only reason to do that is if you think that it's worth the hit. Yeah. And having Nathan Cullen sit on the backbench for 4 years is not worth that hit. There is going to be some long-term damage with Indigenous communities over what happened for the NDP in this campaign. These are people with long memories, and they were treated very shabbily. And so to be worth that hit, Cullen is going to have to be in cabinet. I think for him to just sit and not earn any good press on the backbench is not going to be worth it. They're going to need to put him in a cabinet ministry where he can be put in the position of announcing good news and changing the world and all that stuff. But just sitting in the backbench, he'd disappear, and it's not worth it. That's my take anyway. But there are a lot of others that completely disagree.
But can you let him anywhere near any ministry that has to do with UNDRIP or reconciliation? I don't think he can.
Well, certainly not Indigenous affairs, which I think is what they were planning for him originally. I suspect they give him what would be perceived as a somewhat minor ministry, where he can still be front and center, but he's not going to be, kind of the backbench of cabinet, if that makes sense.
Yeah. He's the interesting. That's an interesting one to watch. Of course, Horgan also has to replace the finance minister because Carol James didn't run again.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people think that's Bruce Ralston's role to be had, but again,
We thought that
another old
last
white
time.
guy, which is a problem for the NDP.
Yeah, we thought that last time.
That's true. You're right,
Look,
actually.
and having dealt with Bruce on a few files when they were in opposition, very intelligent guy, very up to speed on what other countries do as far as taxation systems going.
Yep.
Does his homework. I think a lot of Bruce as a human being, not as a dipper, but as a human being. I'm just kidding, Bruce. It's okay. But okay, but he didn't get a sniff last time. I don't know why he'd get a sniff this time.
Well, only because he seems like the best possible choice on what they have. And that's assuming, I mean, we're assuming Adrian Dix is not going to move. We're assuming David Eby's not going to move. Those are assumptions. Yeah. Probably a solid assumption in Adrian Dix's case. Mike Farnworth, I guess, in terms, and I'm talking about their senior cabinet ministers and what roles you could put them in. I just don't know.
If Horgan's tired of the Eby show, you could see a sideways / demotion.
That's possible. Yeah.
Suddenly got 55 seats. You don't need him anymore, right? Like, you don't need him as much.
That's true. And I mean, they're going to have the fact that they're going to need a gender balanced cabinet to hide behind, and the fact that they're going to have to promote some people of color as well.
Yeah. Anyways, these are champagne problems to have for our champagne socialists.
Very nice problems.
Yes. Yeah. They are. They'll figure it out. I'm sure. We didn't talk about the pandemic.
No.
So voter turnout is going to be at an all-time low, around 51%. Yeah. That is not good. That is it reinforces that this was a cynical, election call, and we should never forget that. Actually, let's talk about one other girl. I want to talk about the press gallery because and John Horgan's reputation, because I think in this campaign, this decision triggered something in the press gallery that will be interesting to watch unfold for the next few years. The last few years, Horgan and his cabinet, by and large, gotten very friendly press. And, I love Rob Shaw to bits, but David Eby's hot yoga, is not necessarily the kind of hard-hitting investigation I need into AG. And I know he wrote lots of stories negative about, settle down, Rob, I get it. But at the same time, that became a bit of a, everyone kind of pointed back to that, like, you like yoga? Really? That's, okay. They were in a honeymoon period. There was a sense from the press gallery, thank God we don't have to talk to Shirley Bond or Rich Coleman or Mike DeYoung anymore. We've got new people to talk to. Premier dad joke, all that nonsense. I feel like that's completely stripped away now. Like, I think the press gallery, by and large, will return to the very strong questioners that they have a reputation of being up until the last few years. Certainly, we've seen a shift in Von Palmer's writings. And it comes down to two things. He called an election during a pandemic at a time where none of you were allowed in the ledge to actually interview anyone. He called this election, and the numbers then, we went into a second wave. And the Premier Us versus Them, the Us versus Them document. And, I think both of those are big hits. My sense was listening to the press conference, there was a lot of online eye rolling at the idea that, I'm going to reach out to the other leaders and work with them. No one seems to believe that anymore.
No, well, and for two reasons. A, they were working together, and then they had been working together for 3 years, and then the reason he gave for calling the election is we can't work together anymore. Yeah. And now he has a majority, and he doesn't have to. Yeah. So, I mean, of course, it's just ridiculous. I think you're right. There are going to be people listening to this rolling their eyes, saying, well, you're going to talk about Horgan's honeymoon being over. He just won a crushing majority. We're talking about the honeymoon with the press gallery, and I think you're right. And the reason for it is, along with the reasons you just stated, is that they liked Horgan, I think, personally, because he's a likable guy. He is. Yeah. But when the election was called and the NDP were not forthcoming, that's being charitable, about the reasons why, the media felt lied to because they were. Yeah. And that is the one thing. People do not forgive having their intelligence insulted. That is the one thing people will remember for a long time. And while it will, the results seem to indicate it was the smart play for the NDP to force an election, you're right. The tone and tenor of coverage is going to change now.
Yeah, and there's nothing to hide behind. When he breaks the promise now, he can't hide behind, the Greens made me do it. So, that's a big change in it. I don't think the media cares so much anymore about the 16 years. It's like, dude, you've had 7 years to fix ICBC. Like, or by that time, get on with it. Why are there more portables? I think he'll be held to a much higher standard. It's it's tough. Like, look, the press gallery individually, they're tough. They ask great questions. They're good folks, but they do live in a bubble that doesn't necessarily represent what a lot of other British Columbians are seeing and facing. So it is important that they hold them to account. And the other thing is, the NDP apparatus were so obnoxious on social media this time. And everyone's obnoxious on social media, but they were very obnoxious on social media. And I think that drove a few reporters crazy too. So
you're right. The tenor on Twitter was, it was quite nauseating at times.
I deleted Twitter and Facebook from my phone for a week, partly because detoxing after campaigns is always a good thing. Like you spend so much time on it. Like they're real people, but it's not a real cross section of British Columbia by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah.
I'll still have to check in, every day for work on the laptop or whatever, but it's not on my phone. It's not on my thing. And I think my encouragement to a lot of folks involved in politics is take a week off Twitter and Facebook. Like, you'll feel better. You'll feel better as a human. So it was a grueling election. Elections in the middle of second waves. 4,000 COVID cases diagnosed during this election campaign. By the time they get sworn in, there might be another 4,000. Like, I don't know. I always look at how governments come in, because I do believe that's how governments end up going out. Like the old Batman saying, you either die a hero or live to be the villain. And so I spent a little time here thinking about, okay, how has Horgan gotten here to this majority? That is likely how he'll go out. He'll break his word again. He'll be held accountable for it, and he'll lose. And no victory is final. That's the 16 years of BC Liberals. No defeat is forever, and that's the mindset going forward.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look at 2001.
Yeah.
Was it 76-2, and then 4 years later, the NDP posed a real threat. Carol James really built that party up from scratch. And that's something else we barely touched on, as we've seen the last of Carol James, who is, by anyone's estimation, a remarkable MLA. But if she can build the NDP up from 2 to a very credible and close opposition in just 4 years, being 10 points down now, 4 years is forever in politics.
Yeah, for sure. We should do an episode sometime in December when things are quieter, where we look at all the MLAs who didn't run again and then who were defeated, and just talk a little bit about each of them, kind of give them a little going out party.
That's a good idea. Actually, I would enjoy that, since they won't get it in the ledge.
Totally, yeah. The Carol James, the Ralph Sultans, the Rich Colemans, maybe the Shaz Joe Halls,
the Andrew Weavers.
That'll be a long segment in that episode. But we should do that.
Yep.
Look, as someone who's had his name on a ballot municipally, it is hard. It is rough to put your name out there. You feel very exposed. You're basically asking to be hired or fired from a job publicly. Kudos to everyone who did, even the BC Conservatives. Kudos to everyone who did put your name out there on a ballot. We couldn't have democracy without you. And whether you won or lost, I hope you have taken something positive from the experience and have a better appreciation and affection for your community. And not to end on such a nice note, because niceness is not my gimmick at this point. But as someone who's been there, I've lost an election, I've won a couple. I get it. God bless you for running, and I hope it was a worthwhile experience for you that you'll either look back on and laugh, or go, "What was I thinking?" I do both.
I couldn't agree more. I have never put my name on a ballot, and I mean ever. I never even did student council, but I have been close enough to it to know that I never ever want to do it. And for those who are brave enough to do it, I have nothing but respect. I agree. I don't think we could possibly end on a better note than that. Are we going to do this next week, or?
Yeah, let's do it. All right, we might as well.
All right, excellent.
What else are we talking about? Come on.
That's true. All right. Until then, he's Jordan Bateman. I'm Maclean K. This has been BC Poly Hot Stove. Happy politics.